So let's head to the first external speaker. And if we go back a couple of years and we ask the questions, where are the use cases and how does it work? And we had a phase of experimenting, and there were a lot of crazy things going on out there, and some of them didn't work. But after using these tools for a couple of years and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't, we have some idea about how interfaces should not look like, but work. Look like doesn't work for that. And what are design principles? What are the rules to follow, the best practices, at least to do the first steps, and then you can go on from there. And if there is one person out there that knows all of that, then it's Hans van Dam, because he's the founder of Conversational Design Institute. And it's all about what we learned a couple of years up to now. What are the basic design principles we should follow if we design for conversations?
Yes, here. Let's see, can you guys hear and see slides? Can anyone confirm that you can hear me?
I would confirm that.
Okay. Perfect. You can see some slides as well?
Yep, we can see the slides.
Okay, perfect. Then there's just a delay. Hi, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. That they have this romantic relationship until he sort of realizes that she's talking to tens of thousands of other people at the same time, and he drops out and he ends up in the Uncanny Valley to never return to the experience again. But it sort of shows us that people and AI, we will be living together, we will be working together, so we need to learn to communicate with each other. And that's really where conversation design comes in. So what we do at Conversation Design Institute, we train and certify conversation designers to make these AI assistants more helpful, natural, at scale. So we expect about 10 million people to be working in this field in the next few years. So we always have these platform shifts, right? And they occur about every 15 years. You know, we started with personal computing, then it went mobile, and now it is the world of AI assistants, whether it's the chatbots on social media, whether it's on your website, whether it's on smart speakers or in your car. It doesn't really matter. And each of these shifts require an entire new skill set and workflow. So when we started thinking about personal computers, all of a sudden we created a graphical interface, and we had to figure out how we were going to interact with it and how we had to design for it. When mobile was the revolution, we started thinking more about user experience design because we had multiple touch points and multiple devices interacting with each other. Now with AI assistants, we have to think about conversation design. And what I really want to emphasize here is that conversation design is not just some add-on for a user experience designer that, you know, takes a couple of hours and then just does what he always does, but in a different interface. No, this is as big as user experience design is today. That is how big conversation design is going to get a couple of years from now. Because what companies are trying to do is really looking to automate 85% of their conversations on all the different channels. So whether it's on their website, whether it's on WhatsApp, whether it's on Facebook Messenger, on Alexa or Google Assistant. So they're automating every conversation that they have. And what we try to get companies to do is to actually build one AI assistant that then interfaces with people on all those different channels. So you build one big bot, and then that talks on the different channels. So what we see now is that a lot of companies around the world are developing these in-house conversational teams, and they're really becoming the standard in the enterprise. So we have teams of 100 people working on conversational AI. Teams of 20, 30 people is very normal. So just like you cannot imagine a company without engineers today, you cannot imagine a company without conversation designers 5 years from now. And I think that's really important to think about if you're an enterprise. You're going to have a department. So who's going to be working there? And what are they going to be doing all day? But what is conversation design really? Right? And the way to think about it is that when I have a conversation between a little robot and a human, then two things stand out, right? One of them has an artificial brain and the other has a human brain. And they both have their own limitations and capabilities and triggers that they need to function. So if you want, your robot to work, it needs to understand the intent. It needs to understand entities, understand context. So we use all this natural language understanding technology that helps us turn natural speech into structured data. But then when we talk back to people, we actually need to consider the biological brain. And people, in order for them to function, they need empathy. They need helpfulness. They need a compliment from time to time. So if I want to have a proper conversation between, a robot and a human, then I need to make sure that I give the person that so that the conversation continues. Because people, we want to understand what people say, but it's also important that people feel understood. And we want to have a fair balance between the two, because otherwise we're never going to have a good conversation. So when you think about the artificial brain and the human brain and the language that, we use between the two, it's important to understand that technology, psychology, and language are equally important. So a lot of times, you would put engineers in the room and they would build something for a year and you'd open a window and then you would just hope that that would work. But if you look at the reality, nobody interacts with those chatbots. And that's why we have so few success stories and we're getting more and more now. But we really want to have a fair balance between technology, psychology, and language because people are just as important as your technology. So at Conversation Design Institute, we now have 3 certificates that we train people for. And CAI trainer, these are the people that train your language models, that build the system to understand what people say and give them the right response. Then there's conversation designers that think about the structure of the conversation, the most natural flow, and use research and psychology to make it work. And then you have the conversational copywriters. And these are the people that, are your expert copywriters. They are the editor-in-chief and they protect the tone of voice and they really design for behavior. And all of those things that I just said will probably, be a bit more clear in a couple minutes as we sort of touch on them throughout this talk. So let's first discuss kind of the psychology of conversations. There's always this silly story, but it illustrates an important point. There's 2 fish that are swimming in the water, and they bump into a third fish, and they're like, "Hey, good afternoon, good afternoon. How you doing? How you doing?" One fish says, "Isn't the water lovely today?" And the other fish, they look at each other and they're like, "What the hell is water?" Because fish don't know about the water, and fish are surrounded by water their entire life, so they have no notion of what water is. And it's the same with people and communication. So we communicate our entire lives, even before we're born, and we are very good at it. And we have a lot of advanced techniques that we use when we talk to each other. But the problem is we have no understanding of all the advanced, clever principles that we apply as we interact with each other. And therefore, when we create a conversational experience, it's often very cold and robotic and ugly because we didn't understand the nuances that are part of communication. So what we need to do is much better understand how people communicate, and then we can deconstruct that, and then we can apply those principles much more effectively and create better conversational experiences. Now, this beautiful man is Paul Greisy, and he coined a corporative principle. And it pretty much means that when people interact with each other, we cooperate. We want to help each other. And we do this by providing the right amount of information. What we say is truthful. We infer relevances. We adjust our tone of voice. And all of these things come natural to people. And we're not really aware of it. And they're very difficult for robots. Well, let's look at a few examples that illustrate this. So people tend to skip steps, right? So you can pay using Cash App or credit card. Do you want to pay? I'll put it on my Amex. All right, so this is a very normal thing for people to say, and every person would understand this. But this is very difficult already for a chatbot to understand. So don't expect a yes or no answer to a yes or no question, because that's simply not how people speak. Or we overshare. Let's say this is a smart speaker. So how many children do you have? well, let's say there's Katie, William, John Jr., but your voice assistant is waiting for an answer or for a number. So please answer using a number. So this is very difficult already. So how a lot of companies would traditionally solve this problem is they would, put engineers in a room and they would create a list of all the different names that are out there. And then when they hear a name, they'll do +1, right? Or they add the commas in between to figure out how many items are on the list. And before you know, it's a 2-3 week project. But if you have a conversation designer on your team, it's like, how many children do you have? Well, let's see, there's Katie, William, John Jr. Sorry, how many children is that? So with a rapid reprompt, a repair message, we now get the customer to say, oh, that's 3. All right, so by understanding the psychology, we can use language to then make the technology work better again. So these kind of things can save you a lot of money if you understand this better. But also people infer meaning. Did you file the paperwork? Was that for today? That's very normal human communication. But if you really look at the sentences here, you can see the complexity here already, right? Please answer yes or no. It's the same when you're on the train and the conductor walks in and the conductor says good morning. The conductor doesn't say good morning. The conductor says, may I see your tickets? So language is very complex and we don't really understand the complexity. And therefore we create very terrible chatbots a lot of the time. So what we've been able to do is actually create a workflow that helps teams create better experiences. And the 3 mistakes that we see made a lot is to just start with technology. So companies, they bring in technology, they start building, they start deploying on different channels, because that's what they tend to do, right? If you put engineers in the room, they're going to be engineering. And then you add a few managers and they're just going to be managing the engineers, but nobody's really thinking about what they need to do. Well, we tend to focus on knowledge management, right? A lot of times we know so much about our organization and people ask a question and we just can't wait to share everything that we know about this organization. We call those Niagara Falls chatbots. They just keep spitting out information and it's not a good experience. Or we start with the business process, right? So if I want to order a product, we just look at what's the internal process of ordering this product and we turn it into a flow chart. And then we ask someone to turn the lorem ipsum into actually English or German in your case, and then we hope for that to work. But people don't speak the way your business is organized. So that doesn't work either. And I know that they should, but they don't. So it's tricky and we have to deal with it. So what can we do about that, right? And there's 3 main steps. So first we look at the requirements. Then we go to happy conversation design. And then we go to detailed conversation design. And we're just going to talk about them a little bit today. So in the requirements phase, what we really want to do is, look at kind of what's the technology, to what extent are we technically capable of automating conversations. Then we look at the use cases. What are the conversations that we're going to be having? Then who are we going to be having those conversations with? And who's best to do that on our behalf? And that gives us our bot persona and tone of voice. So let's talk about that a little bit. This one's always kind of nice, right? This one's nice too. So we all see a building here, but we also see a face in the building. And once we see that person in that building, we cannot unsee it. This one's really cute. I always like this one. It's called pareidolia, right? So it's the tendency to perceive a specific, often meaningful image in a random or ambiguous visual pattern. All right, so we see faces in things that clearly aren't human, and we cannot undo it because we're biologically wired that way. But also when we hear a voice, within 1.5 seconds, we create an image of who that voice belongs to. Is it a man or a woman? Where are they from? What do they look like? How do they relate to me? How can they be of value to me? So people assign persona to an experience. And if you have, 1 million people interacting with your chatbot or voice assistant, they're all going to create an image of who they're talking to. Because it is the same for chat as well, right? And I think dating apps are a great example for that. If you put it in the chat room with a stranger and you do a few messages back and forth, then you already create an image of who you're talking to. So people will do that when they talk to you on WhatsApp, on your website, on a smart speaker. So we want to take control of that narrative and actually carefully create the persona that they're going to have in their brains so that they can have a good brand experience and have more success, right? And Because if we don't do that, it's going to be inconsistent, it's going to be less likable and less trustworthy. And we end up in the uncanny valley. And what it pretty much means is that when something is very robotic, then people are okay with it. If something's very human-like, then they're also okay with it. But if they're kind of not sure, that's when they end up in the uncanny valley, like in the movie Her that we saw on the first slide, when he realizes he's talking to tens of thousands of other people. Right? And the reason for this is that people use a different part of the brain when they interact with something than when they interact with someone. And when your brain is conflicted, it creates a very bad experience. Now, since we want to have longer conversations with people because we want them to buy our products or leave reviews or whatever we want them to do, the cooperative principle kicks in, right? And they're going to feel committed to the conversation and they want to be helpful. So we want to make sure that it is human-centric, that it is a good experience, and that we have the fair balance of clearly communicating that, you're talking to a robot, but respecting the human elements within that conversation. So what we want to do is very carefully craft a bot persona before you create any type of chatbots. And what this really is a fictional character that has a background story, that has a purpose, that has a way of speaking and acting that allows you to then design the conversation. So in this case, we have a butler named Henry. So when we now need to take in a reservation for a restaurant, we can think, how would Henry actually say these things, right? And how would Henry communicate here? And that creates a good, consistent experience that creates trust with people. And when there's trust, people will interact with you and they will continue the conversation. So now we're going to go to actually designing some conversations, and we're going to buy some sneakers. I thought that would be fun. Now what we do is happy conversation design. These are kind of the steps that we would follow. So select the use case. We're going to do sneakers. Then we look at the bot needs and the user needs. And I'll show you that in a bit. And really what we're doing is here, we're mentalizing the conversation. We have the conversation. We make it inclusive, and then we optimize it for behavior. So we like to use this canvas. When you have a conversation, you want to think about, my customers, where are they likely to be? Who are they with? Are they in a rush or not? You can imagine having a very different conversation when, it's rush hour and you're on the train versus, it's 8 o'clock at night, you just put the kids to bed and you're having a cup of tea. And then, what does someone want to achieve and what do they want to know? What motivates them about this and what are they worried about? But also, what do they expect this chatbot to do? Do they expect this chatbot to be very intelligent or do they expect it to be very disappointing and dumb? Those things are very relevant for the dynamics of a conversation. And then from the assistant's perspective, so what are some of the things that we can do, some of the things that we cannot do, things that we can tell or know already, some of the questions that I might want to ask, and what's behavior that I want to promote and discourage, and those sort of things, right? So let's look at the sneakers. Let's say somebody's at home, they're on their computer, maybe their partner is in the next room, but they're not really interfering. So there's no rush, but I'm excited to run again. So what I really want to do is buy cool sneakers, and I want to know which ones to get. So I'm motivated because I want to look fit, I want to get fit and look kind of cool while I do it. But I'm always worried that if I don't get the right ones, then, it's like, oh, I buy it today, and then next week there's a new model, or it turns out I got last season's model, and I feel disappointed. So I expect this system to help me select sneakers, and I'm really afraid to make mistakes here. Now, from the assistant's perspective, I can help you find the right sneakers and add them to cart, but I cannot recognize you, right? So I haven't, there's no identity system here. I can tell you what's in stock, and I must ask questions like, what's your running goal? What's the shoe size, the price point, and the color? And the behavior that I promote is to add it to cart and maybe get some extras. And what I really want to discourage is people browsing too much because there's just too many options. So once we sort of have this context of the conversation, what we like to do with important journeys is to kind of role play it. So one person is going to be pretending to be the customer, and the other one's going to be actually playing the chatbot, right? Let's say it's on WhatsApp. And what they're going to do is sort of study the scenarios like improvisational theater. And then they're just going to have the conversation. And we want them to sit back to back from each other so that, they only have words to communicate. Because if you do this in person, you're going to be using your hands a lot. And it's going to be very distracting, and you're going to use nonverbal communication. So you don't really get to the core of the conversation. And what this allows you to do is really understand what takes place in someone's mind when they're interacting with you. So when you say, this product is great for you, it's like, yeah, but how much is it? That's already anxiety, an expression of anxiety and uncertainty. So then we learned that it's better to say, this product's great for you, it only costs $100. Would you like to know more? So it allows us to answer questions before they arise, and that creates empathy and allows people to follow along with what we're sharing with them. So let's look at some of the conversation design fundamentals that need to be applied in every conversation. So, okay, you want to buy sneakers. Do you know which ones? So, okay is an acknowledgement. We need this for voice as well. And it pretty much tells someone, hey, I'm listening. You want to buy sneakers. I'm repeating back to someone what they said so they know that I've understood them, right? So I'm listening. I hear you. Do you know which ones? That's the prompt that says, now it's your turn to speak again as well. So it's very clear. We use this as turn taking. It's very important. This is kind of like the conversational mantra, acknowledgement, confirmation, prompt. So I hear you, I understand you. Now is your turn to speak again. And this keeps the conversation going. So let's say we write this and we kind of test it out with a bunch of people during a Wizard of Oz test. And what this means is that we have our conversation, we've created our script, and now the other person can speak freely, but we stick to our script. And you do this with about 10 people to get the feedback that you need, because you created something for one person when you designed it. Now you need to make sure that it works for everybody, right? So you stick to your script, other people interact with it, and then you learn what does and does not work. And during our situation here, we discovered that you can't just say, buy these shoes and then you're ready to go. It's more complex than that, so people aren't ready to buy it. So what we now need to do is actually apply some behavior design during this expert rewrite. All right, so we've mentalized the conversation during the canvassing. We had the conversation during the role-playing exercise. Now we tested it out with a bunch of people to make it inclusive, and now we're going to optimize it for behavior. And what we like to do is use the BJ Fogg behavioral model for that. So we look at motivation, ability, and prompts. And it pretty much means that you can design any behavior if you have the right balance of motivation, ability, and prompts, right? So if I want to do something, I need to have, it pretty much says that if I'm very motivated, it can be a little harder. If I'm not as motivated, it needs to be very easy for me. And I always need to have a prompt to do it. And what we've been able to do is develop all these copywriting techniques, and there's many more than this, that we assign to those axes. So if you know in a dialogue that you need to work on motivation, that you can use social proof or a sense of urgency or commitment or a loss aversion, choice architecture. For prompts, we can use simple questions or curiosity. So we have all these specific copywriting techniques that can be part of your toolkit to make our conversation better. So let's try and use a few and see what it does for us, right? So this was our initial message. Okay, you want to buy sneakers. Do you know which ones? The acknowledgement, the confirmation, and the prompt. Now we're going to add anticipatory enthusiasm. Okay, I'm going to help you find the right sneakers. Does that sound good? So because I'm saying help you find the right sneakers, I'm already starting with the end in mind, right? The person already thinks that they're going to be successful now. It's kind of like when you book a holiday trip, you see pictures of your destination and you already picture yourself being at that destination, right? It's called anticipatory enthusiasm, and it helps with increasing motivation. Now I'm going to apply expectation management. Okay, to help you find the right sneakers, I'm going to ask you 3 simple questions. Does that sound good? So what I'm saying now is this is what's going to happen. I know that I know I'm going to get successful. I'm going to find the right sneakers. And all I have to do is answer 3 simple questions. All right. It's very simple. It's better to ask 3 simple questions than 9 complicated questions as well. But by just telling people what's going to happen in the conversation, you increase their motivation. Let's see if I can use social proof here. Okay, to help you find the right sneakers, I'm going to ask you 3 simple questions. For most people, this only takes a minute. Does that sound good? All right, so now I'm saying for most people, this only takes a minute. I'm telling now, a lot of people are talking to this chatbot to find the right sneakers, and they're going to be successful. So this is increasing motivation again as well. Now I can even apply choice architecture. Okay, to help you find the right sneakers, I'm going to ask you 3 simple questions. For most people, this only takes a minute. Does that sound good? Yes, no, tell me more. So what I'm doing here now is the yes and the tell me more are both positive options. So if I add more positive options, the odds of my customer selecting a positive option greatly increase. And that's how I can use choice architecture to increase the success rate of a particular message. Now I can apply some personality as well. Okay, to help to find the right sneakers, I'm going to run you through 3 simple questions. For most people, this only takes a minute. Ready, set, go. And then go now, let's do this. So what you're seeing here is, let's see, how many is it? 2, 4, 6, 8. In one seemingly simple message, there are in fact 8 different writing techniques that are applied. And this is how you make these chatbots, particularly if you want to sell products, more successful. But these principles apply in service, in sales, and it doesn't really matter what your domain is. So once we have this conversation, what we start doing then is, training the language model, making sure it's inclusive, that we respect people's linguistic preferences. We think about the long tail. When do we hand people over to a website or to an agent or to a different channel? The way to think about it is you want 80% of the people go through 20% of the conversational paths. If I'm a restaurant and people want a table for 8 o'clock for 4 people, a chatbot should handle it. But if there's 13 people and 2 of them are in a wheelchair and one of them has a nut allergy, they should just give us a call, right? So all these exceptions, don't bother. Repair flow, what are you going to do when, you misunderstand people, you don't understand them at all, systems break down, those sort of things. You want to have messages for all of that. And then it's an ongoing learning experience. So it's really one workflow. And these use cases, they come from the business, they come from data science, they come from the analytics of your current assistant. You run them through happy conversation design, where you mentalize the context of the conversation, you have the conversation, you make it inclusive, and then you optimize it for behavior. And then you start building it. And the way to think about this now is, should you have all this advanced behavior design copywriting stuff from day one? Or is that a little too much, So the way to think about it from our perspective is, the more conversations you have, the better they should be. And so when you think about the user experience, you go from something that's functional to something that's ultimately delightful. So you start small. If you don't have a lot of traffic, just get something to work. And as it becomes more important, you start increasing the customer experience as well. So the more conversations you have, the better they should be. I'll skip those real quick. So what we noticed, and I think that was interesting, you touched on that a little bit at the opening as well, it's not just, technology, it's not just skill set, it's culture, it's mindsets. And so what we try to do now is really develop a model where we can say, okay, you're in this phase of your maturity, these are the type of people that you need with this mindset, this is the skill set that they need, this is the technology that you need for this phase. And as you sort of grow into the operation, we kind of get a better understanding of how you go from an innovative culture to ultimately a conversational mindset in the boardroom, where everything that you think about in your business becomes conversational on every channel, with employees, with customers, with leads, etc. So people wanting to reach out, we've got lots of libraries with courses that we're bringing, the copywriting courses, the AI training course, the design courses. And I think what will be interesting for a lot of people here, this one with Haptic, releasing shortly, it is on WhatsApp very specifically. So learning how to create chatbots on WhatsApp should be interesting for a lot of people. So if you want to know more, you can reach out, go to the website, conversationdesigninstitute.com, or shoot me a message at hans@conversationdesigninstitute.com. I'm also on Twitter if you like that. If there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to entertain your curiosity.
So I would have a couple of questions for you. The first thing you said, as you mentioned, the 3 failures, the 3 mistakes you can make. There are two of them about starting fast. The one was, start fast with technology. The other, start fast with business. So if I want to start fast, if I want to, convert my boss for a project, and I want really to have something in hand to show him, what do I do?
Take one use case, keep it very simple, and just hack something together real quick. And you can use a prototyping tool for that. You can use some simpler technology for that. But don't do too much too quickly, and don't stick to your traditional methodologies. So really, if you want to put something together, take one use case, have the conversation, figure out what it should look like, and build that real quick to just show the value and show the potential to your stakeholders, I would say.
And still use a prototyping tool, just show him a dummy?
Initially, I'd start with a dummy, or even make him part of the design process. Show him the dummy, show him the potential, then you get some budget, then you start building your first thing. What we see a lot of companies, they just, once they think, okay, conversational is the way, then they just start bringing in too many people, too much technology, and it kind of kills the creativity in the design process. And then, they kind of get stuck in the whole project.
Right, I understand that. I think that was a big mistake we made with Google in the beginning, because the tool was so easy to access, and everyone everyone went in there and said, okay, I can build something that really works, but on business-wise, it didn't. Second thing, within the dialogue, you talked a lot about explaining what happens to the user, what kind of reaction the system waits for. Is there a threshold? Is there sort of a bad user experience if I explain too much?
Yeah, it's a good question. So what you always want to have, you always need to work within certain standards. So one of the things that we use is a very simple thing. It's the one breath test, right? So if a message takes more than one breath to say, it's too long, right? So you already need to shorten it. So then you take out room of doing all the, hey, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that. So yeah, you can overdo it, and there's ways to prevent that from doing it. But also, if you test it out with people and actually just having the conversation, you can just read out the script with your colleague. If it is annoying to the people you're testing it out with, then you're overdoing it. So it's better to just get that feedback very early on, instead of deploying it and then actually learning this stuff a couple of months later that you could have figured out by just reading out the script one time out loud.
Good idea of testing dialogues in form of a dialogue. Last question on that one, and that's the biggest one, of course, but maybe you have a short answer to it. You made up with her, and this movie is about the addiction of a man to a machine. So where does the ethical discussion start? We talk a lot about deepfakes these days. We had this big rumor going around when Google presented Duplex the first time. So where do we start with that discussion, and do we need an ethical discussion?
Yeah, it is an important one. So one of the things that we are very big on is inclusive design, both in how we speak to people, but also in how we respect their linguistic preferences, right? So everybody has a specific way of speaking. That's one of the key things to, in your designs to be aware of, and to, be human-centric and be ethical in that regard. So the best way to do that is to have a diverse group of people working on the project, and be sure that you cover that. There's obviously technology that's being built that helps with data protection, that helps with security, that helps with privacy. But one of the things that we're exploring now is to actually develop a certification program for ethical use of AI assistants. So we're working with a data philosopher for that. We're working with the Alan Turing Institute to really figure out what do we want this relationship to be between the machine and the human. So I think the big trend is there, and everybody's aware of it. It's now like, how do we find the methodology to really embed that in every organization to make sure that we don't have any ugly surprises?
I think it's a very big topic to certain markets. For example, to Germany. I remember the first days when we talked about chatbots. It was like you asked the chatbot, like, are you a human or are you a machine? And it came back from the service agent, yes, I am a human. And it was like, oh, I'm totally annoyed by that question and the possibility of mixing up both things. Hans, lots of thanks for that, and we're looking forward to seeing you next time. It was a great talk. It was a perfect start in the day. Have a good time.
Thank you so much for having me, and have a great day, everybody. Next time we'll do them in person.